Hi, I'm Dave Kerner. I'm the County Mayor of Palm Beach County for the 2019-2020 term. I also serve as a County Commissioner in District 3 here in Central Palm Beach County. We're here today at the Palm Beach County Governmental Center on the 12th floor, where the County Commissioners have their offices. And I have the unique honor today of interviewing the interviewer we all know as Fred Hadley, the publisher and editor of the Villlage Sentry. How are you doing today, sir?
Very good. Thank you very much for inviting me down.
Thank you. And what do I owe this honor of being the person to interview you?
Well, as the publisher of the Villlage Sentry, among other things, I cover the political beat. And of course, you've been a very successful Democratic candidate, and I've been following your career. And you also have a brother who I assisted him in getting elected. He's now a circuit court judge in Palm Beach County. So I have a sort of a relationship with the Kerners that I enjoy very much. And I think you're one of the definitely one of the future leaders of this county. You're already in a leadership position, but I'm sure you're gonna grow and be even stronger.
Well, thank you for that. You exhibit a lot of passion about politics, about government, about reporting and the press, really. Do you consider yourself a member of the press?
Well, technically, and this is a little bit of a sore point, since I'm not gainfully employed, meaning I do this as a volunteer, under Florida law, I'm not considered a journalist, which means that the Shield law doesn't cover me, among other things. But that's technicality. Aside from that, I do consider myself someone who reports what's going on in and around Sentry Village. The purpose of the reporting is to improve the lifestyle and the benefits that we enjoy in Sentry Village.
And we'll definitely explore that a little bit further, and I'm excited to hear more about your perspective on your advocacy. But the reality is, there's the Fourth Estate. We've heard of the press, and they have certain obligations in society to report fairly and accurately and to inform the citizenry. You hold yourself to that standard, is that fair?
I aspire to. I mean, there's always room for improvement, but yes, that's my goal.
And is it something that you enjoy?
Oh, absolutely.
So I think the first thing that I would like to know, if I may, is tell us who Fred Hadley is. Where were you born? Maybe a little bit about your childhood, and I have a follow-up question related to that.
Sure. Well, I was born in Staten Island, but we moved immediately to Seagate, which is now a private community, but I don't think it was at the time. And I lived in Brooklyn until I was about 7 years old with my mom, and I have a sister. And then we moved to Woodside, Queens, where I attended grade school, junior high school, and William Cullen Bryant High School. And then I started out as an electrical engineer major in City College, but didn't particularly like it too much. And at the time, I was getting very interested in films and filmmaking. And I found out that New York University offers a wonderful undergraduate program. So I transferred over to NYU downtown, and I have a 4-year degree in film production.
From NYU?
Yes.
Incredible university. Are you proud of that institution?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm also proud of some of my classmates. Probably the most famous would be Martin Scorsese. I worked on a couple of his early films, including Mean Streets with Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel. Just what they call second unit camera work, nothing major. And I did another film with Marty where we documented the March on Washington, D.C. by the students. Back then there was this Vietnam War going on, and very unpopular war, and I was very active in protesting that war. And of course, as a result, we were able to bring an end to that war.
Can I ask you, during that time period, the Vietnam era and your advocacy and work on that issue, how old were you?
Well, I was at NYU, so I was in my late teens, 18, 19, 20, what were my NYU years?
Going into adulthood, going to college, starting to figure out the ways of the world a little bit.
Oh yes, absolutely.
It may come as a surprise to you, but my mother and father met in 6th grade in Bayside, Queens.
Oh.
My father went to CUNY, Queens, so City University of New York at Queens. I think you were there for a short period of time.
Not in Queens.
Not in Queens.
CCNY in uptown, in what Convent Avenue on 137 was where I started out in electrical engineering, but then I changed over to film school, NYU.
So that's the question that I have. I also wanted you to know and your viewers to know that my grandfather, Murray Kerner, who's since passed away, and he was the second vice president of the UFT, United Federation of Teachers in New York City. He went to NYU as well, so it's pretty neat, I think, to see some synergy between your history and my history as well, even though I'm a Florida boy born and raised here in Lake Worth, Florida. The question that I had about adulthood is, growing up, what do you recall your first memory as the first passion that you've had? What was that moment where you became passionate about filmmaking or production or the operations of the equipment? When did that happen?
Well, I'd have to give credit to my mom. She would take me to the Museum of Modern Art where they would do these film retrospectives. And I think at the time, this is before I entered NYU Film School, they were featuring the films of Alfred Hitchcock. Now, who doesn't love Alfred Hitchcock? And I know when Psycho came out, it was 1960, I was 12 years old. I had to get somebody, an adult, to sneak me into the theater because they weren't letting kids in. And I was just, amazed by that film, and that was, I would say, the seed that planted the desire to enter filmmaking. I saw what a powerful medium, editing, cinematography, sound effects, acting. That was probably a seminal event in my life as far as getting involved with films, the influence of Hitchcock.
And your entry into that profession was happening as it was in a lot of other professions technologically, sort of in a renaissance of equipment. And you've seen from when you started in the profession to where we're at now today with the iPhones and the technology, you probably had a pretty unique perspective on the evolution of filmmaking.
Yes, I do. When I started out at NYU, it was film making. We did use film, and it was 16 millimeter film, and we used Ariflex cameras, which were German cameras that were actually commissioned for World War II. They were combat cameras, but they're very popular at the time for feature filmmaking. Of course, we were shooting 16. Feature films are shot 35 millimeter, but it's the same idea. And everything was edited with splicing tape and scissors and holding the film up to the light and trims, and you had to save all your trims because if you wanted to add something back, you had to go digging for them. And it was a very clumsy process, and if the film ripped, you then have to take a piece of black film and insert it, as what they call a slug, just to keep the continuity right. And over time, of course, digital equipment came in, and now virtually every film shot for major consumption is shot on digital video and edited on computers. So there's no more scissors and splicing tape. And I was fortunate because, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I was hired to be the house videographer for North Shore Towers in Queens, and they bought me Sony digital camera and a Sony digital computer and Adobe Premiere editing equipment. So I learned how to do what they call nonlinear digital editing, which I absolutely think was a definite advance. I mean, not only is it less expensive than film because you don't have to make work copies and laboratory costs, but it's so much easier to try things out. If you want to do a fade in or a fade out with film, you'd have to bring a piece to the lab and they'd make a fade in, fade out, and then you decide, I don't like the length of it, and it'll cost you another $300 for another fade in, fade out. Now you just do it with a mouse, and it's really easier to do creative work with digital editing.
You said it's easier, and I guess my question would be, was there any struggle or difficulty for you in adapting to the new technologies as you went through your profession?
Not really. I mean, the principles of editing, close-ups, medium shots, long shots, remains the same. There is a learning curve with digital editing. For me, it was roughly a month or two, and I relied pretty much on the Adobe manual, and I did have one or two friends that were wedding videographers, so whenever I got stuck on something, I would call them up and they'd say, no, you want to do this or you want to do that. But it just took me about 2 months because I was already an experienced manipulator of cinematographic images from my NYU film days.
Sure, the technical aspects or the sort of the foundational issues of editing are the same. You're just doing it in a different fashion.
Sure.
And you mentioned North Shore, and you said you got ahead of yourself. There was a whole career that you participated in prior to that, I think. Tell us a little bit about what you did with your professional life.
Well, when I moved into North Shore Towers, which was 1976, I would say, it was only about a year and a half old. The buildings first opened in 75.
Did you live there?
Yeah, I did. I lived there for 30 years.
Wow.
And it was all rent stabilized at the time. I came in as a renter, and there was no cable TV in Queens yet. There was in Manhattan, because it was a necessity because of the tall buildings, you can't get a signal. But in the outer boroughs, it was just a wasteland. There was no cable TV. There was the city of New York was moving very slowly because these cable franchises are licenses to print dollar bills, and there was a lot of concern that everything be done, above board and without criminal elements participating, and so on and so forth. So because of that, there was an entrepreneur, it was a company called Commander Oil that delivered oil on Long Island, and they decided to get into satellite master antenna to get ahead of the cable companies, if you will. So they got a contract with North Shore Towers to put satellite dishes on the ground. They ran wires through the hallways and into the apartments. So we had what they call a satellite master antenna cable system. And I sort of stumbled into that job by asking the owner of the system if I could advertise my technical services. I was installing VCRs, remember those?
I did.
At the time. And he says, well, I have a better idea. How would you like to be my salesman? We're not getting the kind of sign-up rate that we had hoped to get. We have 1,800 and some odd apartments here, and we've only got about 200 subscribers. And I says, well, I'll raise you one bet, and I would also like to do the installs. I'm pretty much of a technician. I like working with my hands and so on and so forth. So he says, well, that's a big move because we would have to fire the company that's doing it, and we don't know if you're really capable. Here's what I'll do. I'll give you a dozen cable boxes, and you see if you can get the people that you sign up hooked up. Well, after about a week or two, I was able to get them hooked up. I had an advantage. I lived right in the building, so everybody knew me. I was able to do work in the evenings and on weekends because North Shore Towers, people are very busy. They go to dinner, they go to meetings. Some of them, go out in the daytime, and the company that they had just wasn't accommodating them. So after about a month, he saw I was able to do the work, and he got rid of the original company and gave me the job of managing the cable system, which means the head end, which is the main control room where all the satellite receivers are, and responsible for the installation. I had a crew of a couple of guys that would do the actual stapling of wires around the apartment. Everything was retrofitted. North Shore Towers was built with a master antenna system, but no one ever anticipated cable. So I got involved with cable installation, and that led to one thing that I'm still doing today, and that is I had a video camera, and I started videotaping the board meetings. It was at the time, what they call a tenants association, and then it became a co-op. They had co-op board meetings, and I would video the meetings and transfer them to VHS tape and bring my VHS recorder down to the cable room in the basement and take C-SPAN off the air because, after all, not that many people watch C-SPAN. No offense, I know you're in the political arena. But, and I would broadcast or narrowcast, if you will, the meetings over the cable TV system. Well, this was very, very popular.
Yeah,
People said, this is a great idea, we can see the meetings, and people would talk on the bus and so on and so forth, and we started to really boom. By the time the system was ultimately sold to Time Warner, who made them a very large offer, we had grown the company from about 200 to approximately 1,200 subscribers.
All within North Shore?
Yeah, this is all within
Right.
the 3 buildings. There were 1,800 units.
So was this happening in other areas of the city where videos being produced of board meetings and aired internally within the association, if you will?
I wasn't aware of it at the time I was doing it, so I was sort of innovating. But then I found out I was going out with a lady that lived in New Jersey at the Galaxy Apartments. I found that they were doing it on an official basis, not with a cable company, but they would actually have their meetings recorded and put on the air. And I started looking around and saw that this was definitely the wave of the future. Providing transparency to the residents through video.
So the foundation of your advocacy was a public service, it was transparency, it was ethics in local government, if you will. I know it's not the government, but these associations have a lot of power. Did you find some fulfillment in that at the time when you first started doing it?
Well, the fulfillment was people stopping me in the hallway saying, hey, we weren't able to make the meeting last night, but we watched it at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we thank you for that, and we had no idea that they wanted to do this or that. And I said, this is a very powerful tool.
Did it bring a sense of accountability to the community?
I would say it added to it. We didn't have any major problems. It was a pretty quiet community. It was a senior community, similar to the Century Village demographic. The average age, I think, was 75 when I was there.
And you weren't 75 when you were there?
No, I of course was about in my 50s when I started doing it.
And so maybe that was your first attempt at retirement?
Well, no, I mean, I did work as a career projectionist with Local 306. It was a union for motion picture projectionist, which means we ran the films in the movie theaters. That's a whole other technological change that the theaters have gone through. I started out with film and 20-minute reels and changing over from one projector to the other, and then we saw it go to 6,000-foot reels that ran for an hour. And then, of course, multiplexes came in, and they put in platters where the entire movie was placed on one turntable, and that was to enable one projectionist to be able to service more than one screen. So I saw the whole transformation of the exhibition, as it's called, industry, go from 35 millimeter, 20-minute reels to now digital. Of course, that was the beginning of the end for my job, because once it went digital, they discovered that there was no longer any safety factor. Film at one time was very inflammable, and the city started weakening the license law, and that was the beginning of the end of that craft. So fortunately, I was at or near retirement age, so everything worked out.
So reflect on that for us for a minute. When you look back on your time in the projection booth, you literally, physically had a unique perspective, and probably had seen a lot of films over your time. When you look back and say, I did this with my life, how do you feel about it? I mean, was it fulfilling? It wasn't without its dangers either, was it?
Right. Well, in a sense, I was overqualified for the job. I did have a degree in film production, and yet I chose what I thought was a steady paycheck. And I'm on a pension, by the way, now from the Projectionist Union, so I have no regrets. But I didn't waste that time in the booth. It's a very isolated job. You're locked up really for 12 hours. They did allow us a refrigerator and a hot plate and a toaster oven, so we were able to do a little light cooking while we were working. But the opportunity that I took advantage of was the ability to read. While you're sitting there waiting for that reel to run out and make the next changeover, I'd bring in newspapers and magazines and books, so I continued educating myself. And of course, during that whole period, Watergate was happening with President Nixon, and I remember watching that very avidly. That was the first impeachment that I lived through. I've now lived through 3, Clinton, of course, and now the President, Donald Trump.
So I would characterize your life at this point to be very active, very in the public. You're a man about town. You're involved in politics. You're involved in reporting. You know a lot of high-ranking officials. You've helped them in a lot of ways, myself included. So you're a very public figure in a very prominent county, and you spent your career in solitude in a booth. Do you miss that?
No, I don't miss the solitude at all. I like being invited, like your brother, the Honorable Scott Kerner, invited me to his investiture, and I like sitting there, and I set up my tripod and videotape, and I put these videos on Facebook, and I meet all of the politicians, and it's really given me a second shot at life. Like I say, in a sense, I squandered my life as a mere technician, but I did develop these skills through North Shore Towers of film editing and so on that I'm now using to make an impact.
And let's start talking about that chapter of your life. At some point, you moved down to South Florida.
Correct.
What year was that?
What year? It was 2008.
2008.
It was my 60th birthday, and we were able to retire. Of course, most people waited till 65, but 60, you were able to get the same monthly rate on your pension as if you had waited till 65. Obviously, I would have gotten a few more bucks if I had waited till 65. But I decided that I wanted to get out while I was still fairly young and active, and see the world and not spend the rest of my life locked up in a projection booth.
Where did you, and maybe being locked up in a projection booth, as you say, helped you understand the real value of being out there and engaging the community? Do you think it gave you sort of a second lease on life, so to speak, having spent so much time in this booth?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And you're taking full advantage of it now, it seems like?
The thing about why I spent so much time is that I did not come from wealth. We grew up under extreme poverty, so that weekly paycheck meant an awful lot to me. I got very good medical coverage through the union. Oh, also, I should mention, I would attend the monthly membership meetings of the union, and they were run under Robert's Rules of Order, and that's when I learned about how to speak publicly and how to conduct a meeting and parliamentary procedure. So that was definitely a silver lining to being a projectionist, that through my union membership, I learned about political meetings and how to conduct yourself and speak publicly. I also, you may recall, did make an appearance before your county commission about 3 years ago to talk about, can we get into that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I ride a bicycle. I've been riding a bicycle since I was 15 years old, and one of the reasons why I moved down to Florida is there's no hills, and it's very conducive to bike riding. So Century Village sweetens it even further because we have pedestrian bicycle paths, and it's fairly safe as long as you don't trust any of the stop signs at the intersections. I noticed on certain days, usually in the late fall or during the winter, this burning smell in the air. And I was kind of upset because I came from the capital of pollution, New York City. I lived sort of midway between JFK and LaGuardia and was constantly smelling aviation fuel, which is actually kerosene, highly refined kerosene, and I could smell that a lot. And not to mention automobile fumes and so on and so forth. When I came down here to so-called paradise, I said, well, what's going on with the air quality? And I started to make inquiries and see articles in the press about the sugar industry. And very, very briefly, the sugar industry, which is the largest agricultural industry in Palm Beach County, and it's bigger than all the agricultures put together, employs a technique called pre-harvest burn of sugarcane. And the whole idea is to remove the outer leaf, which does not contain any sugar, so that they can now harvest the cane, which is where all the sugar is. It's a very easy process. You set the field on fire. 20 minutes later, the fire is out. It's a controlled burn. They have firefighters standing by so it doesn't get out of control. But the only problem is it introduces smoke, ash, carcinogens, burned pesticides, and all sorts of undesirable things into the air. Now, although Century Village, Boca Raton, is 40 or 50 miles away from the growing area, which is around the south shore of Lake Okeechobee, if the wind is out of the northwest, that smoke drifts over. They've actually found ash on the beaches of Delray and Boca Raton, so it does get carried by the wind. So I started to do a little research and found out that the Sierra Club had already done a lot of lobbying to try to end this practice. Now, we don't want to end the industry. We know how important it is for jobs and the farmers and so on. But I found that Australia and Brazil have curbed the burning of sugarcane and do what they call green harvest, meaning they go in with machetes. And it's labor intensive, it does cost more than burning the leaf. And I said, well, if it's good enough for Australia and Brazil, why isn't it good enough for Palm Beach County? So one of the things that I did was, there's a 3-minute opportunity everybody has to put in their 2 cents before the Palm Beach County Commission. And I made an appointment, came up, and I spoke to the commission. And in my 3 minutes, I explained just what I said, that it's a more profitable way of harvesting, sure, for big sugar, but it's not good for the ecology. Now, it's also introducing greenhouse gases. Why is that important? Well, short term it's air pollution, but long term it's adding to greenhouse effect. Florida is second, I think, only Louisiana in terms of its vulnerability to sea level rise. We already know that on king tide days, Miami is inundated. Alton Drive, you know, people find octopuses floating around in the street. And as a state that is so vulnerable to this, we ought to be more concerned about pumping more greenhouse gases. So I did appear before the county commission. I did get a little chuckle out of everybody because I said, I did a little research and found that everybody, including yourself, had been accepting donations from Big Sugar, which it was, you know, a normal thing to do. And I held up 7 single-dollar bills in my hand, and I said, I would like to offer any candidate here today a $1 token gesture donation to your campaign to show that we, the people, will make up for any shortfall in donations if you will say no to the sugar industry. And when my time was up, I thanked everybody, and I said, by the way, would anybody like the dollar? And Mary Lou Berger was the mayor at the time. She says, oh, no, thank you. And the audience kind of cracked up, and that was my thing. And then that led to an article that I was asked to do by the West Boca Forum, which was like a spin-off of the Sun Sentinel. So that was published on the same subject. And now the latest thing is that Senator Abruzzo, who was my state senator at the time, became very concerned about this issue and didn't really understand the impact of it until one day he went up and saw that one of his clients had to put his child in a car with the air conditioning on near the sugar burning fields because the kid had asthma, having grown up next to a sugar field. And he became involved after he retired from politics with a personal injury firm, and there's now a massive class action lawsuit against 12 or 13 of the sugar growing industries to, 1, stop the burns, 2, make reparations to people whose health and property have been negatively impacted by this ecologically unsound practice, and 3, to set up forward-going monitoring of the health of the community. And that's still in the courts right now. It'll probably be years before that's resolved.
Yeah, and that's a large federal court case. You've probably learned since that time of your first advocacy before the Board of County Commissioners that it's a very narrow set of people that have authority to change the law on that. And even Senator Abruzzo had to access the court system to try to find a level of justice. What my question to you is it fair to say that but for your advocacy that federal lawsuit would probably never have started?
Well, I don't want to take all of the credit. I was invited by Senator Abruzzo with the blessing of Berman Law, which is handling the case, to attend the press conference. And at one point, one of the reporters said, this has been going on for years, Senator. Why now? And he says, well, I'm going to be honest with you. It didn't really come to my attention until Mr. Hadley over here, and he pointed to me, came to one of the Democratic Club meetings and said, why can't we get a handle on this? And that's when I began to look into it. So I would give credit to the Sierra Club. They were certainly on it long before I was. But as Senator Abruzzo pointed out, they weren't too successful. So I'd like to think that I had a little effect on it, but you know, it's a combination of others as well have been advocating for this.
Well, regardless of the end result of the lawsuit or changes by the legislature in the law, I think it's fair to say that your advocacy was a catalyst for something to happen, and that's the general concept of what you're doing with your time now. I'd like to talk a little bit more now specifically about your role in Century Village Boca, your role in the Villlage Sentry, what drives you to do this, some of your accomplishments, and what your daily life is like on a day-to-day basis now that you're retired, but more active than you've ever been.
Well, when I first came down here, I was pretty much resigned to just being a retiree, ride my bicycle, go to the beach, go to the gym, have a healthy lifestyle. I was pretty much done, with politics and community organizing and that kind of stuff. I wanted to live a quiet life and a long life. But I got pulled back into it, not unlike Al Pacino on Godfather 3, because of certain things that I became aware of in Century Village. There was a lack of transparency. There was a culture of secrecy. Specifically, all of the board meetings were held behind closed doors. There were monthly meetings, what they call delegates assembly, that were open to everyone, but they weren't televising those meetings. So the first thing I saw as something I would be an advocate for was to get those meetings on television. We do have an in-house channel in Century Village, and I kept every month getting up at the meeting saying, every condo and every co-op in America is televising these meetings so that people that are shut-ins, and there are God knows how many shut-ins in Century Village, people that are too busy or have doctor's appointments, can tune in and find out what's going on. So they finally listened to me, and they now videotape those meetings, and they are put on the in-house channel. So that was one of the first things that I did. The second thing I did was when I went to my condo meetings, I noticed they're very poorly attended. And they were just posting notices by the mailroom, and Century Village still does not have set up an email communication system. Would you believe it or not? In 2020, they just haven't really discovered the potential of the internet. And everything is done through a newspaper, which only went online a couple of years ago. Well, one of the things that I advocated for was robocalling. I didn't invent it, obviously it's been around for many years, but I suggested that our board make a robocall to people, just saying, we have a meeting tomorrow, please attend. And what I did was I did a test robocall to the 7 or 10 offices of my association, saying this is a test robocall for Cornwall Association and so on and so forth. And we now have robocalling. So that was something I advocated, and we now have that. It's very, very important, especially with things like boil water notices, where people that are confined to their unit just don't pass by a piece of paper posted in the mailroom that this robocalling take place. So I was an advocate for that. The other thing was I noticed in the newspaper there were no letters to the editor. I said, why aren't there letters to the editor? And they couldn't give me an answer. And I said, every paper that I've ever read in my entire life, the New York Times, the Sun Sentinel, Washington Post, they have letters to the editor. And they decided to listen, and they now have letters to the editor. They have a vetting process, of course, and they don't publish everything, and they restrict it to a few hundred words, but that's something else that I fought for. And these all go towards openness and transparency in the governance of Century Village.
You have a deep, at least, passion or care and concern for Century Village. Do you like it there?
Oh, I love Century Village. My favorite expression is, if I were to hit the lottery tomorrow, I don't think I'd move out of Century Village, because I think it's a great place. The landscaping, we have a wonderful landscaper, Maximum. I think you met him, because there's been some issues outside the village with other landscape companies. I'm glad to say that you did not include him in that. But it's a beautiful place visually. We have a large lake that's man-made. They scooped out the earth to make that lake, and the buildings are piled on that dirt, so it's pretty much flood-proof. We have bicycle paths, we have 3 tennis courts, we have shuffleball courts, we have a very, very good gym, which this year they're gonna double in size. So the lifestyle is incredible. The location is fantastic. West Boca, we're not in the city of Boca, but the post office does refer to us as Boca Raton. And it's a very convenient location. We're near a turnpike entrance, and there's a lot of shopping. And there's going to be even more shopping as they continue to develop the surrounding area. So I thoroughly enjoy living in Century Village. The people there, I mean, I'm from the Brooklyn and Queens area of New York, and I would say fully half the people are from Brooklyn. So, it's like Brooklyn South, I'm very comfortable, and the people are great, the neighbors, and it's a very warm, nice place to live.
When you go out in the community, as you do, I'm sure on a daily basis, do people know who you are?
Well, many of them do, but since this is an email publication, not everybody is familiar with my physical appearance, but people stop me all the time. Are you Fred? I get your newsletter, and so on and so forth. Out of 5,712 units, we're in about close to 1,300 subscribers right now, plus however many forward them to their neighbors, and that will continue to grow. One of the things that I helped was that we now have universal internet in every unit. We have a fantastic cable TV contract. One of our presidents, Mr. Donnie Cape, was instrumental in negotiating this. And we have just got the greatest deal. We've got high-speed internet in every unit, up to 200 meg. We have 2 DVRs. We have 200 channels. We have HBO. We have on demand. We have X1 voice remote cable TV system, and it's all included in our monthly carrying charge. And it breaks down. I'm sure Comcast won't be happy to have me broadcasting this, but it comes out to about $58 a month for internet and this cable TV package, and that's real good internet, 200 megabits. So I helped advocate for that because prior to our contract, there was another contract in the other Century Village, and they lost that contract to Atlantic Broadband. And what I did was publicize all of the things that Atlantic Broadband was going to give the other Century Village. I publicized it in my newsletter, and when Comcast saw that, they got a little bit nervous. So we were able to use that, plus the excellent negotiating skills of Mr. Cape, who in his day job manages hockey teams, and I was able to get the St. Louis Blues their first Stanley Cup, but I'm digressing now. But we were able to really twist their arm and get I think one of the best. I mean, I don't know what you're paying for cable and internet, but most people tell me they're paying well over 100. I hear numbers like 180, 200 for the package we have. And,
I definitely pay more than the folks in Century Village are, and I think it's an example of leveraging the people power,
Yeah.
which it seems like that's what you're about. And
Yeah.
your advocacy it's not contained within the walls of Century Village. It seems as though, in my experience, you also engage the government at large and the members of that government in Palm Beach County. Is that fair?
Well, I do interview the candidates, and I try to be fair but tough. Commissioner Berger said that I'm tough but fair, and I interviewed her opponent. He made a couple of missteps during the interview, so that might have impacted on his loss to Commissioner Berger. One of the key things that I accomplished, which I wasn't setting out to do, but I was instrumental in the removal of the first judge in the history of Palm Beach County, Dana Santino.
And
she agreed to do an interview with me, and during the course of the interview, which with her consent I recorded for accuracy, I asked her if she can differentiate herself from her opponent, which was an attorney, Greg Lerman. And she started to go into this whole thing that as a defense attorney, he represents murderers, rapists, batterers, child molesters, and so on. And me being a strong believer in the Bill of Rights, and particularly the Sixth Amendment, right to a full and fair hearing, fair trial, right to confront your accused, I happen to think that defense attorneys are one of the most noble professions that you can do, and it's what separates us from banana republics where people are just taken away in the middle of the night. In China, you see what happened with that doctor that was advocating on the coronavirus, and they just don't have free speech in a lot of these societies. Well, anyway, so I said to Dana Santino, is there anything wrong with being a defense attorney? And she says, well, I get it, everybody's entitled to a strong defense. Well, long story short, I did speak to Greg Lerman, who was very upset because she was also, or her campaign was posting things that are injurious to his reputation and to that of all defense attorneys by extension, kind of saying that defense attorneys are no good. And I don't agree with that position at all. And as a result, he filed a complaint, and that led to a removal hearing, and well, the rest is history. She became the first judge to be removed. And I kind of felt bad about it because I thought she was a very bright lady, and that she showed a lot of promise. And during the year that she served, while her case was pending, she really did a great job. But apparently, the Palm Beach County, the Bar Association and the Judicial Qualifications Committee felt that an example needed to be set. That if judges and judge candidates think that they can just pay a fine and break the rules, and their salaries are about $160,000 a year. So what's a $100,000 fine? It's like maybe a year's salary, but you still get a 5-year salary. That they just didn't think that they were taking it seriously. They decided to make an example out of her, and she's now been removed, and I think she's practicing law.
And whether the remedy was appropriate or not, you were engaged in a public service when those comments were made. You knew at the time, you're not a lawyer, correct?
No legal background at all.
But you knew at the time that they were at minimum inappropriate, maybe bordering on unethical as a judicial candidate. But regardless of all that, your advocacy and your participation helped lead to the first removal of a judge in Palm Beach County. I know that's not something that you ever endeavored to do.
No.
But
in fact, I endorsed
sure.
Dana Santino, and I did not remove my endorsement. You have to understand, and this is one of the things I testified to at her removal hearing, that there was a context, and the context was the Donald Trump candidacy.
Sure.
And the things that he was saying during those debates with the 17 other Republicans, and I'm not saying anything for or against Donald Trump. I respect his office, and I respect his responsibility in the job he's doing, even though I didn't vote for him and probably would never vote for him, but I certainly have a lot of respect for him and what he's been able to accomplish. In that context, what she said to me, although offensive, it just wasn't that shocking when you compared it to all of the things that Trump was saying. So I did not remove my endorsement, and I was asked why, and I said because endorsements are not just based on a single interview, it's a totality of circumstances, how well you communicate, how well, she had reached out to Century Village, she had done what we call a bagel rally, her opponent did not. So all of these factors was why I continued to endorse her, but I felt that it was sufficient to go on record that I didn't think what she said was appropriate. And of course, that became a subpoena, and I was deposed, and then I was asked to testify. Substance
of that case aside, was there an aha moment there, or was there a reflection on what your actions and the influence of the advocacy that you do? I know you weren't advocating for her removal, and you didn't go into that interview, but for your engagement in this process, it is somewhat conceivable that the first judge in Palm Beach County would never have been removed. When you look back on that, I know that you liked Dana, former Judge Santino. You endorsed her.
Everybody did. She's
sure.
A wonderful person.
As did I if I recall correctly. I can't endorse judicial candidates because I'm a partisan officer. But did it reinvigorate in a weird way the influence that you have through, what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I'm very vigorous, that case aside, but it certainly affirmed what I do.
What else has affirmed that? Let's talk about some of your accomplishments.
All right, I want to talk about a few things in Century Village. I'm very concerned, as a senior community, about the well-being, the health, and the security. There are a couple of things that I was able to get media attention focused on that I'm particularly proud of. One of the first things was we did have a case where a woman living alone passed away and without detection. And one day I heard her two dogs, her building was opposite mine, like barking in great distress at like 5 in the morning when I went to take in my newspaper. And then when I got up later, the dogs were still barking. So I went over and I saw the Venetian blinds were all mangled and the dogs were like very upset. So I called 911 because it appeared to either be a case of animal abuse or abandonment. And I called up the sheriff's office and they sent a few deputies over. They finally got access to the unit. It turned out that the woman had passed away and that she had been lying there for something like 2 weeks. They were able to tell by her condition.
Do you think there are people that would have walked by that scenario and not done anything?
Well, you know, a lot of people in these multiple dwellings, you know, they don't want to get involved. Back in New York, we had a famous case called Kitty Genovese, where a woman was assaulted and screaming, and a lot of people just, they're afraid to get involved because you're living in close proximity, and a lot of these people that own dogs are very aggressive, and they don't like to be told or criticized. So if they ignored it, I can't say that they were totally at fault, but I chose not to ignore it. And as a result, one of the things that happened was we were able to bring in a spokesperson from the 211 program, and that's a free program that anyone, not just seniors, can enroll in. And what it is you register with 211. You just dial that number on a landline, or there's a 10-digit number if you're using a cell phone, and you enroll. You give them your name and your phone number, and every day at a time that you determine, you get a phone call, a welfare check to see how you're doing. And if you don't answer that phone, you give them a list of contacts, and they will reach out to your neighbors, and if they can't get to you, then they call the police. So that was implemented as a result of it was the CBS affiliate did a news story on that.
So you were able to get the news media to come to Sentry Village and report on this?
Yes.
Can I take a short point of personal privilege and speak directly to the viewers? 211 is a system that Mr. Hadley's described that is a resource free to all Palm Beach County citizens. It is funded by the Board of County Commissioners. And I want you to know that 211 also acts as a resource if you're contemplating suicide, if you are struggling with mental health issues. There's a wide array of services available through 211. And I want everyone to know that if they're ever struggling, it's not just about checking in on people, but if you're contemplating actively hurting yourself, things of that nature, those are people that can help you immediately. You just dial 211, and I hope that if anyone is ever in need of it, they'll take it up. Take me up on this offer, Mr. Hadley's offer to call 211. And you said I just chose not to ignore it, right? That was something that you said about walking past that condo unit, and it affected change. Is you choosing not to ignore it sort of a way of life for you now?
Well, I would have to agree with that, yes. Let me tell you a couple other things that occurred. There was a case that received a fair amount of news coverage. One of our residents went to the Diamond Exchange on Glades Road, and he was tailed by a perpetrator back to Sentry Village. When the resident entered the resident lane by virtue of a decal barcode that lifts the gate, the perpetrator piggybacked that car. That means before the gate had a chance to come down, he rushed through the gate. And when he got to the parking lot of the resident, he got out of the car and hit him over the head and robbed him. And what happened is people wanted to know, well, we must have a video of the car entering that gate. And Sentry Village Management says, no, we only record the guest lane. The thinking is that the resident lane are our residents. We don't need to videotape them. I said, well, here's a perfect case where you do need the piggyback syndrome, where somebody just sneaks right in behind a resident. So I called up, at the time, she's now retired, it was Emmy Award winning Linda Figueredo. She went and got married, so we lost her. She came down and she did a story on that, and as a result, within a short time, Sentry Village budgeted additional gate entry, license plate cameras. So now all of the lanes, the ingress lanes are videotaped so that we have a record of every vehicle, not just the ones in the guest lane. Another thing that I involved the media in was after the last major hurricane, what was it?
Irma?
Yeah, I guess it was Irma. We were without power for about a week in Century Village. And I think it struck on a Sunday. And by the middle of the week, one of the associations was going to have a barbecue. And one of the contractors brought in grills, and they were gonna serve free food because these people were going for days without electricity. They couldn't cook. You know, we have electric stoves and so on in Century Village. And I decided again to call my representative at the time, Senator Joe Abruzzo, and said, Joe, there's gonna be a great photo opportunity. Why don't you come down here and get involved with this? And it's gonna be on the evening news. So he says, well, I do have a commitment to some other constituents up in the Glades, but what he did is that he sent a text to FP&L, the power company, saying that Fred is getting CBS down at 3 o'clock, and there's gonna be a story on the evening news that these poor seniors are without electricity. And, you know, I understand there are priorities. I think the first priority in restoring service is to the power company itself if it's knocked out. They have to come online. Then I think it goes to hospitals and nursing homes. Then it goes to retail centers so people can go shopping for food and supplies. And the last thing on the food chain are residential. Well, we were able, through Senator Abruzzo's intervention, to inspire FPL. They sent in some tree cutting bucket trucks that cut a lot of the foliage that was interfering with the transmission lines. And by 7 o'clock that night, we had the power up in about 95% of the village. And I'm very, very proud of that. That was a real world case where, you know, picking up the phone and doing something had an immediate benefit for many people. PBSO was also notified by Linda Figueiredo that these people no one's doing welfare checks. The next thing you know, and I've got photos, about a dozen sheriff's cars came into the village and they went door to door and did some welfare checks. And then the most recent example of what I call media involvement was when we lost the Citizen Observer Patrol. That is a part of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office volunteer program, and it consists of cars that look like sheriff's cars, but they say Citizen Observer Patrol on the side. And they're staffed by volunteers, they don't get paid, that drive around communities, and they're equipped with two-way radios, and they're the eyes and ears for the sheriff. And they're not supposed to act as cops, but they just call the real police if they see something that's out of the ordinary. So we had that for many years in Century Village. And then a dispute arose between an officer of the village who wanted the patrol to remain entirely in the village versus the sheriff who felt that it should be shared with the surrounding community on the theory that that will deter people from even entering Century Village bent on crime. And because there were some hostile words, let's just say, between the officer of our association, our community, and the Sheriff's Office Volunteer Department, they were told that if you can't keep it in the village entirely, we don't want it at all. So we have not had that patrol for over a year.
And you didn't like that?
And I didn't like that, because I believe that it's an effective deterrent. When people see that car making the rounds, they're less inclined to commit a crime there. And plus there are cases where they see kids jumping over the fence. We don't have much crime in Century Village. Most of it's either like car break-ins, there's a certain amount of what they call insider crime, where people working for people steal jewelry, that kind of stuff. That you can never prevent. But we just felt that it was a loss of a major deterrent. So I worked, I got Michelle Casada, who's the senior reporter for the WPTV NBC affiliate, interested in that, and she came down and did a story on that. And as a result of that, It brought media attention, and plus I've been working with Sheriff Rick Bradshaw and telling him how we don't want the Sheriff's Department to think that we at Century Village don't want this service. We absolutely do. It was a misguided attempt by an officer to try to get a whole loaf, and I told the sheriff, we're perfectly willing to settle for half a loaf, or whatever loaf you want to give us, because any presence is better than no presence. And last month, I'm very proud to say, the COP volunteers came and did a recruitment drive at our monthly delegates assembly meeting. So we still don't have the patrols restored yet, but it's a work in progress, and I'm hopeful that we will get that.
So you've talked about some of your accomplishments, and I'll just use the FP&L issue for an example. I suspect, having been born and raised here in Palm Beach County and lived through many hurricanes, that the moment those lights came back on, it made a lot of people happy in your community. Sounds like you leveraged your ability to interact with the press and your relationships in the political world to assist your community. Same thing with the COP issue, same thing with the piggybacking. And you've done this as a private citizen. Why isn't there an elected Fred Hadley? Do you have any aspirations?
Yes, I do. First of all, as I said, there's a lot of secrecy and there's a lot of good old boy cronyism in Century Village. And it's very difficult for an outsider to come in unless you're friends with the existing officers. Nevertheless, I did run as a candidate 2 years ago for what I consider a stepping stone position. It's called second vice president. I didn't aspire to be the president because I don't think a person should start off at the top. And I did run for that. Out of the 77 delegates that voted, I got about a third of the vote, which I am considered by many of the delegates controversial because I go against the tide and I buck the system. So I thought I made a respectable showing. So I am now a candidate again for second vice president of Century of Boca Raton Umbrella Association, which is a voluntary association of the 16 condo associations in Century Village, and that election will be on March 16th. It's a three-way contest. There's no incumbent, like there wasn't an incumbent last time, so I think maybe I have a fighting chance to get elected this time. One of the things why I would like to be elected, even though I've achieved a lot as a non-elected person, is that I still don't have access to these executive committee meetings where a lot of business is done behind the scenes. To compare it with our sister community in Century Village, West Palm Beach, all of those committee meetings are televised and they're open door meetings. And for example, a cable committee meeting, you can sit at home and watch it on TV with the cable committee negotiating and telling Comcast or Atlantic Broadband what they want. And I feel if it's good enough for the original Century Village, which opened in '69, it's certainly good enough for Century Village Boca Raton, which opened in about 1978. So that's still one of the goals that we have not been able to achieve, and that is to open up all of these committees. And what they say is that since these committees are done by an umbrella association, they're not subject to the Florida statute, which only governs condos per se. And since this is a group of condos and not a condo, it's sort of a loophole. Now, there's legal differences of opinion on that. The late lawyer Polyakov did not agree with that. He agreed with me that since they're doing contracts that pertain to the associations, that I should have a right to attend it, even though it's being done by a so-called umbrella association. But in order to win that fight, it would require a commitment financially with a lawsuit and a risk of having to pay the other side's financial, and I just don't have those kind of resources. So I'm trying to do it through the electoral process. I feel that if I'm in that room and I'm still publishing the Village Sentry, well, then we're almost to the point of putting cameras in the room.
Did you receive the endorsement of the Villlage Sentry?
Well, we haven't printed the endorsements just yet. We don't want to, what they say, peak too early.
All right. And this is the election's March 13th?
16.
March 16th. I apologize.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best of luck in that election. I've been through a few elections myself, and it takes a lot of courage to put your name on a ballot. And so I commend you for being a candidate. You've spent now about over 10 years in Palm Beach County, right? 2008 you moved down here. What do you think of the local government? What do you think of the elected officials? How would you compare it to the city of New York?
Well, when I first came down here, I was shocked to hear the term corruption county. There was a race going on, a political contest. It might have been for sheriff and everything. And I was hearing these terms thrown around, and I said to myself, oh my gosh, So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. All political systems in America are to some extent or another corrupt. People are under the influence of donors and special interest groups and not immune to lobbyists and so on and so forth. I don't think we'll ever be totally free of that. But I'm doing what I can to open up the process. I know I made an impact on the judicial races, and through my interviews, I try to keep the candidates on their toes, and I'm doing what I can to remove that stain. But that was a shocker to me to hear that term thrown around. I'm sure you've heard the term.
Well, I'm going to share with you that the Corruption County moniker came after a series of U.S. attorney indictments on 4 county commissioners from Palm Beach County,
Right.
one of which was indicted and removed from the office and chair that I'm sitting in now. So yes, it hits a little bit close to home for me, and it's one of the reasons I ran for county commission, being a local boy, if you will, because it was embarrassing. I was serving in the state house, you'll remember, and so the reputation of our community is important to us. Yes. I chose not to ignore it. And it seems like that's what you've done with your life, and what you're doing now is you're choosing not to ignore issues in your community, and you're seeing a lot of return on investment. Any words of wisdom or inspiration for your viewers and subscribers about public service?
You should never be afraid to make your opinions known. You should write letters to the editor. We have a forum in the Villlage Sentry, which is my weekly publication. It comes out every Friday night. And we publish letters, and we allow anonymous letters. And some people say, well, you shouldn't do that. If they're not willing to sign the dotted line, you shouldn't print their opinion. I don't agree with that, because this is a residential situation. When people live in a home and everybody knows their address, there's things like chewing gum in the door locks, or harassment, petty harassment. So I feel if a letter is not a crackpot letter and contains a suggestion or a complaint, as long as I know who all the people are, because I have a list, I know who they are, and I keep that close to the vest. I don't share it with anybody. We don't take any advertising, by the way, because I don't want to be fall into the trap of being afraid to print things that might offend a contractor or whatever. And we do this strictly volunteer. We don't make a dime off this. In fact, I spend close to $500 a year is my distribution cost. I use Constant Contact, and I gladly donate that to the community because I feel it's important. And a lot of people say, especially snowbirds, when they go up north, they are the most avid readers of the Villlage Sentry because they want a periscope into Century Village. They want to know what's going on with their investment. During the whole hurricane thing, I'm proud that we did live streams the morning after the hurricane where we did damage assessment. We drove around Century Village and showed where the trees were down, and the people were watching these things in New York and in Canada or wherever they're living on the edge of their seat, because the big question is my home in one piece? And we will continue to do those things and do everything we can to make Century Village a better, safer, friendlier, more open, transparent place.
And that is in and of itself public service. You don't have to be in an elected office to do it, but I'm inspired by your aspiration, and it's one that I've dealt with in my life, and I can tell your viewers that the value you receive from public service is it's indescribable sometimes, and I've shared that joy with you before. In my real life, outside of being a county commissioner, you know that I'm a former prosecutor and an attorney, and so I've taken a lot of depositions. Today wasn't designed to be a deposition. I wanted your viewers, and I wanted, to give my benefit, for the benefit of me as well, to know about the man behind the camera. And we learned a lot about you today, and I've really enjoyed this. But one question that I always ask during a deposition is there a question that I would have or should have asked that you wanted me to ask, or was there something else that you think, well, not in the litigation context, but today, that your viewers should know about you, or a message you wanted to send, since this is a unique opportunity for me to interview you?
Well, I wish I could say that I served in the armed forces, but I was very active in getting my education during the time that I would have served. But I am proud to say that I share with you a former membership in the Civil Air Patrol. My unit was based in Astoria, Queens, and we didn't do too much search and rescue in New York City, but we did do some orientation flying. And I know you were in the Civil Air Patrol. Obviously, we were not in the same time frame, but that's something that I look back fondly on. And I learned a little bit of military life. I learned how to do push-ups if your uniform wasn't starched properly. I learned about chain of command. I learned about starting and ending every sentence with "sir," and so on. I got a taste of the military, and I'm very glad that I went through that.
A taste of the military, but also a taste of public service and giving back to the community. I think that's, for me, was the initial spark in my life. Or my parents, too, were both in public service. My father was the chief of police here in Lake Worth. But just so the viewers know, Civil Air Patrol is it's an auxiliary of the United States Air Force. It's a volunteer organization. One of the first squadrons ever is located where I was born and raised, right down the street, and I was a member there from the age of 12 to 18, and it's aviation related. And if you look on the wall, you'll see me standing next to an airplane that I got to fly by myself and get my license in. And so Fred and I shared that that connection to the Civil Air Patrol, and I think in some ways inspired us to public service.
Oh, and I'd also like to get in a plug for your brother.
Thank you.
And I did support and endorse Scott Kerner in his recent race for circuit judge in Palm Beach County, and he was elected.
He was elected,
yes,
and he served honorably.
And I was invited to his investiture, which I was very thrilled and honored, and I asked for his permission to videotape it. And that's one of the things that I do, is now he has a lasting memory. I know a lot of his in-laws are not in the area, and I saw a lot of comments that they weren't able to attend. So that fills my heart with joy also.
Do you get feedback from the candidates and from the elected officials when you attend an event and you live stream it?
Oh, absolutely.
The appreciation.
Yeah, we try to go to most of the local clubs, and we do live streams so that, let's say, the tax commissioner or the or county commissioner candidates, instead of just talking to 40 or 100 people, they now have an audience of hundreds or even thousands of people over social media. And I'm very proud of that I'm able to expand their message to a larger group than just those who attend the meeting.
I'll close with this. You've said "we" on many occasions throughout this interview, usually in reference to the Villlage Sentry or your work that you're doing. Is there a "we"? Is there a team that you work with, or who's in your life? Well,
my significant other is Melissa Gorkin, and she's a very wonderful person, and I've been going out with her for as long as I've been a resident of Palm Beach County, and she's currently what we call consumer editor for the Villlage Sentry. She finds the interesting articles that people in Century Village might want to read. For example, roast chickens at Costco, or the foods you should and shouldn't buy at the dollar store. So she's very active in helping me put that together. In addition, she's always on my arm at any of these political events, and she gives me a certain, I guess, legitimacy and stability. Sure. And everybody likes to see us there, because compared to most of the attendees, we're relatively young, so I can tell you that she's definitely the power behind me. She's been a tremendous help and inspiration to me.
Well, it sounds like the two of you enjoy each other's company, you enjoy what you do together, and she certainly gives you a level of credibility that you would not otherwise have.
Well, and I'm gonna lay it on too thick.
So I do send my best to Ms. Gorkin, and I wanted to take one moment as we're nearing the end and say that it's been a privilege for me to be the interviewer. I'm a subscriber to your publication, have been for a long time. I enjoy reading it. I don't know the internal politics of Sentry Village. It's not in my district. It's not one that I've spent a lot of time at, although I am friends with Irv Schlossberg, who's in Kings Point. So I'm learning, but it's been an honor to be on this side of the table for a change with the man himself, Fred Hadley. And on behalf of the Board of County Commissioners, I wanted to give you this challenge coin, which is the seal of Palm Beach County. And I wanted to thank you for your public service and what you do here in our community.
I'll just hold that up so that folks can see that at home. Well, thanks very much, and I just want to say the fact that you are not my elected official makes this more valuable, that you're not just doing it for a vote, because I can't vote for you, although there may come a time in the near future, let's not go into it today, where you may be running for a county-wide position. Do you want to say anything about that?
What I can say is that I'm at a professional fork in the road in my life. I'm getting to that point where I'm becoming a very effective litigator and trial attorney, and there are some financial rewards that come with that. And I'm also deep into a political career of public service, and in my heart, I know that my life was meant to be dedicated to public service. And so serving in elected office is something that I enjoy. Serving the community is something that I enjoy. And I think my intent is to go farther in this county, but not beyond that. I don't have any aspirations of Congress or anything like that. I think, like you, I find when you impact the person that's your neighbor on a daily basis, it's fulfilling. So hopefully there's a next chapter to what I'm doing in Palm Beach County, but I can tell you I do love what I do now as a county commissioner.
Well, I think you're doing a great job, and I've enjoyed my friendship with you over the years, and I really appreciate that you gave me this opportunity. It's a real honor. I've been interviewed by the mayor of Palm Beach County. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fred. I'm Dave Kerner, the mayor of Palm Beach County, and again, this concludes my interview of the publisher and editor of the Villlage Sentry, Mr. Fred Hadley, and it's been an honor, sir. Keep up the great work, and thank you again for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.